integrity. We hustle daily to gain wealth and worry not about health. All leaders have absolute power with the sole right to rule forever. So the whole country going sick while we minding our own business. Hey, hey, we building $1 million. Come with it. Give it up, give it up, give it up, give it up. Put up, Monday. One more time. We live a life of vanity and compromise or integrity. We hustle daily to gain wealth and worry not about health. All leaders have absolute power with the sole right to rule forever. So the whole country going sick while we minding our own business. Hey, hey, we building $1 million houses and driving expensive SUVs. Our goal is to reach the top, and we try no matter what. So moral values going down the drain, and our children we don't train. So our policies, I, myself and me, and have no time for the country. Blow! Blow! Put up, mommy! Come again! Churches seem not to care about Christ. Money and wealth is the only prize. The country is being torn apart by greed, hate, and by hard hearts. Crime and violence on the increase. Job opportunities on the decrease. So the whole country going sick while we minding our own business. Hey, hey, we building $1 million houses and driving expensive SUVs. Our goal is to reach the top, and we try no matter what. So we wine and dine with those who doing wrong, and our spiritual values going down. So our policies, I, myself and me, and have no time for the country. Come with it. Put up, mommy. One more time. Character embodies heritage and brightens life as we grow in age. But dignity we sacrifice and compromise truth for lies. We steal and cheat just to stay on top, and corruption practices we won't stop. So the whole country going sick while we minding our own business. Hey, hey, we're building $1 million houses and driving expensive SUVs. Our goal is to reach the top, and we'll try no matter what. So more we have, more we accumulate.
All right, folks, let me say a special greetings and welcome to all of you locked into the Civic Vibes platform here this afternoon. My name is Loftus Jira. It's already 6 p.m. Yes, 6 p.m. And so it's yet another very interesting afternoon here as we're about to make a very interesting start in just a while. This evening, the 5th evening of February 2023, it's always a pleasure, folks, to have you in our company each and every Sunday whenever we get here. So it's always a pleasure here. This afternoon, folks, we will be having a special invited guest, or we have invited a special invited guest in the name of Dr. Thomson Fontaine. He should be here with us from the 7 o'clock hour to about 8 o'clock tonight. So we expect Dr. Thomson Fontaine to be in the house with us tonight, speaking on an all-important topic, the banking situation in Dominica. We have come to know of late the situation where the banks, the financial sector is under a crisis situation, as it were. And so Dr. Thomson Fontaine, that is his forte, as it were. That is where his strength is at. And so he will be speaking to us sometimes later in the program from about 7 o'clock on that all-important situation that is there to all of us in Dominica, and even those of you outside of Dominica as well, all right? So please stay tuned for that conversation that is supposed to start at about 7 o'clock with the leader of the United Workers' Party, that is none other than Dr. Thomson Fontaine. But even before that, we get to have a very interesting conversation this afternoon from 6 to 7. That is the whole electoral reform situation in Dominica. Yes, you heard it right. We have been speaking here on the Civic Vibes platform for a number of years now, this whole drawn-out process of electoral reform. And so this afternoon is no different of a program, but we're going to go into the aspect of the report. Byron, so Dennis Byron, that is, he introduced into the Dominican quarter as it pertains to his report. He was appointed by Roosevelt Skerrit / the Dominica government to make recommendations for a way forward as it pertains to electoral matters in Dominica. And so his report is out. We're also hearing about a draft legislation that's supposed to be taking effect anytime soon. So Alvin Thomas is here, and we will be going into that conversation just a little deeper for you guys this afternoon so that you can, get a better grasp of just what that report is all about. Trust me, it will be a continued conversation, read that report and the legislation to come. So you're in tune, folks, for a very interesting evening here with us. By the way, we are now streaming the program live on YouTube. So those of you YouTubers out there, you can also log into your YouTube aspect of things. And yes, we are streaming live on YouTube as well. Okay. So that is what technology affords us. And so we are trying our very best each and every time to make it much more accessible to you guys out there on the different social media platforms. All right. Before I move across to Alvin, before I move across to Alvin, let me just touch some of you who are here with us already. And then I will ask Alvin to have his opening remarks pretty soon. Brina Francis, yes, that's Brina Francis or Brina Francis. You are there with us from St. Kitts and Nevis. You're saying that you're in the house. So good evening to you in a very, very special way. Peter Carbon, you're there as well. Is Eliza Louise Gomes, you're there. Good evening to you. Marlene Shillingford, good evening to you. Olivia Esprit, good evening as well. Brother Dave Bertrand, he says he's locked in. Good evening to you. McDonald Thomas, good evening to you, my brother. I think I saw you celebrated a birthday. So maybe last week it was Mr. Thomas. So happy belated birthday to you, my brother. I hope that God, the good Lord above, continue to give you strength and whatever you need as you continue on this side of life. All right. So Brother McDo, Thank you and greetings and welcome, my brother. Glenda Lavi Duburton, good evening to you as well. She's saying that she's in the house. New York is in the house. So good evening to you, Lavi Duburton. Carol and Ford, you're there as well. Lauren Lestrade, good evening. You're there. Bernard Aline, Mr. Aline, good evening to you, all the way in the UK at this time. Yes, Eliza, I taught you already. Dory Drago, I spoke to this brother earlier today, and a very formidable brother indeed, in the name of Dory Drago. He's locked in from North Carolina, USA at this time. Vernie Vash, you're there. Rosie Nice, you're there. Pat Cobbett, brother up in the North area, good evening to you. Andy Matthew, Adelaide Paul. Adelaide Paul, good evening to you. I saw your post earlier, really Calypso. Maybe sometime Adelaide Paul will invite you here to talk some Calypso discussion, right? So yes, but good evening to you, Adelaide Paul, in a very special way. Mr. Alexander, good evening to you as well. Veronica Pascal, you're there. Carol Fontaine, you're there. Juanita Prince, good evening to you. Celia Godden, you're there. Carol Olivaci Bruni, you are also there as well. David Andre, a special good evening to you. Henrietta James, Cyrus Raphael, this brother is locked in and he's listening from Southern California. Henrietta James, you're there. Marvella Defoe, Lucinda McDowell Thole, good evening to you. Kate Alexander, Owen Prosper, Philip Privu, you guys are there. What we ask of you, all of you who are there already, please share the live with your friends or contact. Make them know that that program is on and they too should be part and parcel of the program as we're moving on. So without further ado, let me move across to not a guest anymore. Alvin is part of us. Let me move to Alvin Thomas. Good evening to you. A very formidable brother indeed. Always make time for Dominica and his country. Brother Alvin, good evening, sir. How is it?
Yes, good afternoon, good evening, Lofty. Pleasure to be with you again on yet another program, Civic Vibe, one of our Sunday's program. And it's always a pleasure to be a part of that conversation and to share whatever knowledge or information we have that would help advance and Dominica and inform our people. So it's always a pleasure. Like you, I want to say a pleasant good afternoon to the many folks who have already tuned in or logged in to the program. I think that speaks volume. That is a commitment to self. It's not just us, but without those persons there would be no program.
True.
The fact that they religiously commit to that 1 or 2 hours on a Sunday speaks volume. So that gives me encouragement that all is not lost. There are folks back home and in the diaspora that are concerned with what's taking place back home and making their business to be part of the program every Sunday. As you said, we will be discussing that all-important topic of electoral reform for the first hour, and then move into the whole question of the banking situation in Dominica as it relates to our whole general economy. Yes, on the matter of electoral reform, I know some persons might be saying, well, you know, aren't we flogging a dead horse? And my response to that is no, emphatically no. It's not dead, it's quite alive. And we need to keep it alive. Contrary to what some other persons might want to call it, we'll keep it alive. So I'll be happy to go through a couple areas of Sir Byron's summary report, which I had a copy. I was able to get a copy and just peruse it. So I'll be happy to share some of the information in there with our fellow Dominicans at home and abroad. And I look forward to a very interesting conversation. While there, I just want to say hi to my friend Paula. Wherever you are, Paula Celestine, you might be tuning in, just saying good afternoon to you. And hope you're doing well this Sunday.
Yes, indeed. Good afternoon to Paula as well. Paula, wherever you are, hope you are enjoying your afternoon. And yes, we know that your heart is there with us. So you are there in heart and spirit. And so Paula, again, to you and your family out there, good evening to you. Alvin, just before we go into things here, what is the weather like by you, Alvin?
Oh, it's beautiful today, Lofty. Beautiful, beautiful. When I last checked about an hour ago, I think we was hovering somewhere at 61 degrees. So it may I mean, if you have 61 during winter, that is fantastic.
Okay.
Bearing in mind what some folks in the eastern part of the country, Boston, New York, and a couple of those other states were experiencing over the weekend. I think it was in Boston. There was something like a minus 13 or minus 9 degrees. Wow. So it was really cold. I mean, anytime you go in that minus, no, it's cold. So we have beautiful weather today. 61 is lovely. I was out earlier, and you know, folks takes advantage of that weather when it's like that. So we are out. Yeah,
well, unlike you, we in Dominica, we have been having some intermittent showers now and then. I don't know if folks can hear it, but the water on my roof is basically doing a number.
But shall we say it's showers of blessing?
Well, yes, showers of blessing indeed. The farmers need it. Yes, the farmers need it. But you know, when some folks in Dominica see or hear about water like that,
I know you get scared.
You know, Hurricane Maria always comes to mind, and Irma always comes to mind, and you know, some persons it brings a very terrible memory.
The flooding and yeah. It's just natural. Yeah. Well, Lofty, maybe before we jump in the program, I know you mentioned to Adele Paul, our good friend who's on the Calypso. And of course, I listened to the Calypsos last night. There were 20 of them. Rather interesting. The topics and the lyrics and melody, put everything together. I think it was rather interesting. I stayed up from the start to the end. I, like you, I had some other, you know, my 9 wasn't the 9 that came out. I had some other persons. Among the 9, I had some folks there, like, of course, Trilogy was his name, and Trilogy, Dice, and a couple others. I had a few names, but some other names I didn't. But I think it was a very good effort by the Dominican Calypso Association. I think we need to commend them for their effort every year to put up a show where people go in and enjoy and you know, the thing about it, Lofty, this is also an education process in itself, you know, because these guys sing about what's taking place in the country. All the social issues, whatever political issues, you know, you name it. I mean, when you listen to Dice's song on this young girl and a couple other things, you listen to Daddy Chess, the gas situation. So I think they did pretty well. The ladies, of course, come out strong as always. There's still room for more women to participate. But I think overall it was a good show. I don't know what your views are in terms of the turnout. What was the turnout like? Was it a good turnout?
Based on what I saw, the turnout could be better. It could be better.
Okay.
But those persons who were there, the patrons that were there, they did enjoy themselves.
That's good.
Yeah, but to me, the turnout could have been a little bit better in terms of participation or attending the show itself. Alvin, well, to tell you the plain truth, wherever there's Calypso, there's always some kind of controversy. So I wasn't surprised as to when I saw the decision of the judges this morning. For example, I told someone today that I wonder whether these judges were watching the same show that I watched last night. For sure, there are some names that, you know, they plugged in there that were not part and parcel of my decision, or my thoughts rather, when I watched the show and scrutinized last night firsthand. But at the end of the day, they say the judge's decision is always final. But I believe some persons were dealt a very hard blow last night by not being part of that top 9 to meet King JD on the 18th, I believe. So, you know, it is what it is. But there's a situation, Alvin, that before we go into the meat of things tonight, as it were, in terms of the results, Alvin, a lot of times things happen in Dominic, Alvin, and some persons just take it for granted. And I say that to say, over the years, I've been witnessing that sort of gradual delay. Some years, give and take, they are on point in terms of their decision and the timing aspect of it. But over the years, the Dominican public, especially the patrons at the shows, it's sort of bordering on a level of disrespect, if you ask me, for someone to pay their money to come to see a show, and they have to leave that show maybe 45 minutes, an hour after, and not knowing the result rather of that show before they leave the park itself. They have to get it on radio or some other platform. And so I think that needs some kind of improvement. And so the Dominica Calypso Association, you guys need to step it up in that department. Whatever the judges need to do, whatever tabulation, whatever it is that needs to be done to fast track that situation, it has to be implemented. Because what happened last night, and it happened before, it is not good for the art form. It is certainly not good for the art form. And when you have those kind of situations happening and they are not put in check or they are not remedied in a timely manner, then you have all sort of speculation coming in the equation. And so, if even that aspect of things, by not getting in the numbers, not getting in the digits, not getting in whatever they need to get in terms of what they saw on the night and bringing the decision to me, half an hour, 45 minutes max. You cannot go an hour and a half, maybe next day. I remember a time it was the next day to get the decision. So what is happening there that, we're in the age of technology. Everything happens in, sort of real time now.
Yeah.
And the judges in Dominica, I want to give them the compliment, give them the kudos where they do good, because again, it's a sacrifice to come and sit there for maybe 5, 6, 7 hours and pay attention to what is happening on stage. Some patrons have the liberty of going there, knocking around, but so I compliment them for that. But in terms of the final output, that can be remedied, that can be bettered in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Lofty. Absolutely. It's unacceptable that you go to a show and it takes well over an hour to come up with some results in 2023. I mean, clearly there are, let's face it, man, there are so many software, so many, the technology is there where you can tabulate those results within 5-10 minutes. Every judge is scoring and you get your score, you apply your score and the numbers are tabulated and you have a final result. When it goes that length of time, well over an hour, it leaves a lot of speculation in people's mind, unnecessarily. People start to wonder, well, hey, what's going on? Are they trying to do something? Are they not, so I don't think it's good. The credibility of the association is called into question. The credibility of the judges is called into question. Yep. So you're absolutely right. I think that's something we need to fix. And I would hope that the association would be listening and do what is necessary to fix it in future shows.
Yeah, indeed. But all in all, the show itself was, good enough in terms of the Calypsonians themselves putting out their best foot. And I really think that all of them did whatever they had to do last night in terms of their best, putting their best foot forward last night.
Absolutely.
So they gave the patrons their money's worth, as it were, in that department. But yes, we can have, one more point I want to make on that, Alvin, before we move or before we shift gear, is that of late, we have been hearing from some politicians. Roosevelt's carried for sure came square center of that commotion, whereby, Calypsonians rather, some are being put up and others are being put down by acting or active politicians. And that should never be the case in Dominica. I mean to say, you can have your own preference, that's fine. But publicly come in and make statements about which Calypsonian do this, which Calypsonian do that, and what you'd prefer to like, and who that is not the place. That is not the time and place, especially in the public domain, for politicians who, are active to basically have their say in that manner. And so, whatever this guy said with Ian Cecil and the crew on Calypsonians first, but on Calypso after, that is not good for the art form. And these people, some of these people with their very biased comments, I must say, they are just showing their their dumbness, their foolish ways of just where the art form started, the originality, the origin of the Kaiso art form, what it meant then and what it should mean now. And Calypso, by the nature of it, the art form has always been, Alvin, an avenue where the oppressed people spoke to their oppressor in a certain way at a certain time. That was the liberty that they had, and it transcended down to us, and it should still remain so. So when you have people coming to dabble and want to, sort of go against the grain, it doesn't augur well for the art form. And these people, to me, they are basically, doing much injustice to the history of the art form itself.
No, you're right. I agree with you. I agree with you, Lofty. I agree with you entirely. I mean, what I would say on that as well is that some of us have to learn to stay in our lane. And some persons don't know where the lane is, and they get outside of their lane and get into the areas where they have absolutely no knowledge or competence to speak on. And I think that is part of the problem. And in particular, the politicians who behave like dictators always want things to reflect what they want reflected. And that's how tyrants behave. That's how dictators behave. It is my way or no way. And it's unfortunate that we are now trying to bring that into the politics. You are in the Calypsos. You're right. The origin of Calypso surely speaks to the oppressed and what those Calypsonians then sang about. But it would be interesting to note, though, Lofty, one prolific Calypso writer was that of Patrick Rowland John, who was also Premier and Prime Minister. This guy wrote Calypso, wrote songs for several Calypsonians, and never came in his capacity as Prime Minister or Minister and criticized Calypsonian. And here is someone who could have, because he wrote Calypso. So he has that competence and that authority to have expressed a position one way or the other on Calypso, but he never did that. And he wrote several Calypsos. You know that, this man, Patrick Rowland John. So it just shows you sometimes when some persons who don't know how to stay in their lane would get out of their lane and try to criticize the Calypsonians and, say that they shouldn't be singing about this or that, and that is how they should sing and not sing. I mean, this is just ridiculous. It makes absolutely no sense. I guess sometimes, the best thing to do is to ignore those comments, but like everything else, sometimes you got to call it out for what it's worth. But you're right. I agree to your comments.
Yes, indeed. All right, Alvin, it's 6:30. Let us move now into the topic that we really have to talk about, the whole idea of free and fair elections in Dominica. And so, folks, yes, just before we get into that, remember we are streaming the program live on Facebook, and also an added feature, we are now live on YouTube. So the exact program that you're viewing now on Facebook, those who don't have Facebook, I know some persons don't have Facebook and they say, Lofty, we need YouTube. We need that program to be streamed on YouTube. And so, yes, we are there now. So you can tell your friends, tell those persons who are not on Facebook, they can find that exact program happening in real time now on YouTube, that Facebook channel, that social media channel at this time. Also, to the numbers to call to the program, just in case you have a comment or question or whatever it is you want to ask, the numbers are 245-2396. Again, I repeat, 245-2396 or 615-9470. All right, these are the numbers to call into the program in real time as well. All right, Brother Thomas, let us move on now. The whole talk, and I say talk because it has been a talk for some time, on having Dominica elections be freer and fairer. That has been on the cards for some time. Of late, we come to know that Mr. Byron, was appointed by Roosevelt Skerrit / government of Dominica to basically come up with recommendations or ways that we can make that process freer and fairer. Even that situation as well, there has been some, issues around it. But at the end of the day, Byron came up, Alvin, with a report, which you read. There's also, in addition to that report, draft legislation that Byron came up with in order that the parties involved needs to see, take a look, scrutinize, comment on it. And then thereafter, once there's consensus by these parties involved, then the legislative part of government would go to Parliament with those drafts, and after 3 readings, then the ayes would have it. And then at that end of that exercise, Dominica would be realizing its election be a little freer and fairer. Alvin, you saw some of that report, you read some of that report. What are some of your initial comments based on Byron's words?
Okay, thanks, Lofty. Let me first of all begin by saying, though, that the whole question or the subject of our electoral reform or electoral system, though for some people it may be, as one might describe, dry as dust, or to some as arcane, to many, it is and ought to be a central interest to anyone concerned with the operation of democratic system of government. Okay? Let me repeat that. Though the subject of electoral system or reform, though it may seem dry as dust or arcane to many, it ought to be the central interest to anyone concerned with the operation of a democratic system of government. And I'm saying this to say, Lofty, that election has consequences. And some people might be saying, man, you guys keep flogging this electoral reform. We're tired with that. There's something else, the other thing, electoral reform, electoral reform, electoral reform. Yes, it is important. We have been flogging that horse for the last 19 or so years, one might say. Starting as early as 2004 election, 2009, 2014, 2019, and again 2022. Elections are the defining moment in any democracy. And in any representative democracies, as one scholar once reminded us, election performs 2 fundamental tasks. They confer authorization upon those chosen to represent the electors, and they hold representatives to account for their actions while in office. Electoral reform, electoral systems is the means by which elections are formally structured and thus a vital component in the achievement of those goals. So I am basically saying all of that to put it in a certain context, that this is not something, out there. This is something that is real. And anytime you have individuals or persons opposed to electoral reform or to enhance our system of elections, then that person does not believe in true democracy. That person is either a tyrant, a dictator, and they do not respect our democracy. So I'm saying to our many viewers who are listening, who are viewing this program, to let them understand that electoral reform, until we can get it to the point that we need it for Dominica, we will continue having that conversation. I know time and time again, you hear the statement made, elections are free and fair. I always like to insert one other word here, transparent. Because what the OAS says when they say it's free and fair, meaning that the polling takes place, people go to the polling station, they cast their vote, there are no fights, there are no ballot boxes missing, and that kind of thing. So it's considered, quote unquote, fair and fair. But what about the transparency of it? And that is where we will come into the other aspects of campaign financing, the electors list, voters identification, how do you identify a voter properly, all those matters will come into play. So I would say parent. And I had the opportunity to look through Sir Byron's draft report, or his report dated November 2022. And in the structure, his report has, I think it has, let's see, it's a 33-page report with several content area. Of course, like any other report, starts with an acknowledgement, structure of the report, the background, the scope of work and methodology, stakeholders engagement, the common ground, current process relating to the registering of electors, the weakness of the current process, technology in the voters' identification and registration process, the new legislation relating to the registration of voters, and the draft registration of electors bill 2023. So that's just kind of a breakdown in terms of how the entire document is structured. But in terms of the structure, he indicated there the issues that have been identified can be characterized under two general headings: the cleansing of the electors list with emphasis on voters' identification, and the electoral process with emphasis on campaign financing. Now, in terms of the voters list, we know that is one might say a thorny area. It's an area that was highlighted in the CCJ's report and also made mention in the petition that was filed coming out of the 2019 election, in which Justice Glasgow himself made reference to the question of the electors list. The electors list, as I have said on this program before, is the central part, or a fundamental aspect of an election. Here's what Sir Byron in his report says on that same particular matter. Let me see if I can find it there quickly, Lofty, for you, because it's worth referencing. Let's see there. I had it right there. Just give me a minute, and I will see if I can find it for you. Because what the point is that if the electors list, as it is called, or the register of electors, if that register or that list is compromised in any shape or form, then we have a problem. So no matter what you might say in terms of whether election is free and fair, in terms of ballot boxes not missing, no fights taking place at the polling station, then we have a problem. Here's what Sir Byron says in his document on under the question as it relates to the new legislation relating to the voters, relating to the registration of voters. The voter registration process forms the crux of the democratic process. And it is due in large part to this fact that the mechanism by which voters are registered must be measured in terms of its contribution to the electoral system as a whole. Therefore, the system of registration must be beyond reproach, unquote. So it is recognized there that that voters list forms a critical and central part to the election process. Now, what we saw in several elections, including the just concluded election, was a voters list that seems to be compromised. In the 2019 last election, for example, not the one just held, you had a number of electors at over 74,000, almost 75,000. And you had the population then, as it were, quote unquote, about 72,000 thereabout, 72. So clearly you can see right away, Lofty, there's an anomaly. How can you have more persons registered to vote on that list that you're going to use for the basis of conducting the election than the population of the country? It makes no sense. Now hear what the most recent elections that were held in 2022. The OAS submitted their preliminary report, and hear what their comments are as it relates to that particular matter. Dominica remains one of the few countries in the Caribbean without a voter identification card. Under the current legal framework, voters are not required to show any form of picture identification when presenting themselves at a polling station. There's also no mechanism inside the polling station to assist the presiding officer in identifying electors. That's the OAS saying that from the observation. As a result, the accurate identification of persons who present themselves to vote is largely dependent on the personal knowledge of the presiding officer and poll clerk may have of residents within the community. Several stakeholders interviewed by the mission suggested that it was likely poll workers would know the voter registered to vote at their polling station due to the small size of the polling division. The mission observed few instances throughout the 15 constituencies where this seemed to be the case. So what he is saying there is that even at the polling station, when you come and you say, I'm Loftus Duran, you just say Loftus Duran and you're allowed to vote. The polling clerk or the presiding officer is not even quite sure that you are really Loftus Duran. During its observation, the mission went on to state, during its observation, the mission also noted several cases where voters with the same or very similar names and other demographic data were included in the voters list posted at the polling station. In one instance, witnessed by an OAS observer, neither the polling station staff nor the party representative were able to conclusively identify which of the names on their list related to a voter who had presented at the polling station. Standardized identification criteria or tools would assist in solving similar occurrences. So even from our just recently held election, it is clear that in the absence of a proper electors list or registry and voters identification, the system is flawed, and as a result is open to abuse, and we not having a true, fair, free, and transparent election. Let me also note in terms of the report, to Byron's document under the section that deals with the background, he says there, the importance of this electoral reform, and he's making reference now, was emphasized by the Caribbean Court of Justice when it commented that, quote, there remains areas of grave concern about how the process of these elections, 2019 general elections, were conducted. Future elections in Dominica ought not to proceed with these or similar things. So here you had Sir Byron pretty much endorsing the comment made by the CCJ. So having said that, Lofty, I will say that in terms of Sir Byron's timeline and what's contained in the report, I think his timeline based in his November 6th letter is quite, how should I put it, is quite straightforward, because what he did indicate then prior to our snap election, the Prime Minister throwing a snap election on us, was that this past Parliament would have tabled register of electors legislation in December, this past December 2022, with the plan to enact it in January, which is this past January as well, 2023, so that the register of electors could be complied in accordance with the recommendation during the calendar year. And then he went on to say phase 2 of the report after consultation process, similar to that undertaken with phase 1, would be done in February of March. So it would seem to me that there was a lot in place for us to have had some form of legislation presented to Parliament. Having looked at the report again, I will say that 90% of what would be, one would say, in the best interest of the Dominican people were met. There's one particular area which is residency, and that, as it states, would appear, I believe, in the registration of, let me see if I can find the exact section. That would come under, let's see. That would form under the draft registration of electors bill. And there was a particular, bear in mind, they're still draft bills until they go to Parliament and then they're supported. He states there were two main concerns: mistrust of the system and fear of corrupt manipulation of the procedure. The preference that persons who wanted to exercise their franchise must come home to ensure their place of the to ensure their place on the register of electors was also emphasized. Square brackets have been placed around clause 51, and he's referring to clause 51 in the draft document to indicate that may be deleted. So that's on the question of registering overseas person and I guess the whole question of residency. But the two main areas, which is that of voters' identification and having a comprehensive redone electors list, I think were adequately reflected from what I read in the report. I have not had an opportunity to look at the draft legislations themselves. I know at the press conference that I heard on, was it Thursday, I believe, the United Workers' Party had, I think the president of the party indicated that he would subsequently release to the public copies of those draft legislations. So I have not had the benefit of looking at those. That would be the next interesting area to look at in terms of seeing exactly what are some of the provisions in that legislations as put forward and how that reflects itself. Granted, of course, as you indicated earlier, that those has to be presented to the Parliament, and there and then you will have amendments, agreements and that kind of thing. As it stands now, Lofty, Sir Byron has indicated that there was consensus, robust discussion and consensus at the Electoral Commission in terms of what he's proposing. And he also had consultation with the United Workers' Party and other stakeholders. So in terms of what may be contained in those draft legislation, there seems to be a consensus. Those draft legislation now has to come from the executive. Of course, the Attorney General will have his fingerprint to ensure that the legislations meet and conform with the necessary laws of the country. But those legislation has to come now from the executive to be presented to Parliament, like every other bill. You pass an occupational health and safety bill, the Minister for Health, the bill will be in his name, he presents it to Parliament. You have a tourism, whatever bill, whatever it comes, So that operation has to take place. That is where now the Dominican people need to hold the Prime Minister feet to the fire to ensure that those draft legislations are presented in a speedily manner to the Parliament. Speedily manner. At the Parliament, it is my hope that we have 6 persons constituting the opposition side, 2 elected representatives and 4 senators. that that document would be thoroughly reviewed and looked at, those draft legislation. So constructive comments can be made. And as I said, where there are certain provisions in those legislations that is not in the best interest of the Dominican people, would ensure that those are amended accordingly. But that's where we are. We must not allow the Prime Minister to dictate and move that goalpost again on the matter of electoral reform. We must do whatever it takes to ensure that the timeline of Sir Byron, which is already outside of what it should have been, because all of those timelines, as I said, should have fallen in place in November, December, January, and moving. So what we got to do now, where, for example, in phase 2, had to be presented, he says in his letter, I will present phase 2 of the report after consultation process, similar to that undertaken now for phase 1 in February or March. So it means that phase 1 now may have to take the place, fall into February, March, and then phase 2 may have to go into maybe possibly March, April. So we now must hold the Prime Minister fit to the fire and ensure that these various aspects of the legislation is implemented. I will say one final thing before I end, and I'm sure you know, is that in terms of this, the work, the scope of the work and the recommendation, Sir Byron also noted and recognized that he did use, to a large extent, work that was undertaken previously by various commissions. For example, Pauline Welch in 2017 gave extensive recommendation on reform. That formed part of what his exercise and his work, as well as recommendations from the OAS. And we also had a joint report from the OASS CARICOM and the Commonwealth. So it's a combination of all of those reports and recommendation that form part of that. Let me also say though, to our Dominican people, we will never get at the first shot a perfect, a perfect reform bill. Okay, we will never. So we should not in any shape or form seem to suggest that if there are 5 things that now may constitute a reform, that we want all 5. If you ask me, if we can get the register list to be done in a manner that conforms with best practices of electoral process as obtained throughout the region and the rest of the world, if we can find proper identification, voters identification by way of voters ID card, if we can have some aspect of campaign financing in there and the residency issue, I think we should all go for that. As time goes on, like every other legislations, there are going to be amendments and improvement to that legislation. So we may pass the legislation 5 years down the road, we may have to amend. St. Lucia had about what, 9, 11 amendments on their legislation since they had introduced reform several years ago. So I don't want us to lose sight of trying to, as they say, go for a kill, and as a result, not get the minimum requirement, especially that electors list. Lofty, that is important. That list is important. That's like the Bible. We can't lose out on that. So that's what I'll say for now, Lofty, and I'm sure you might want to ask further or make some comments as a result.
All right, thank you, Alvin, for your comprehensive reporting, as it were, on the report of Sir Dennis Byron thus far. Let me just take back Dominicans a couple months, maybe a year thereabout, year and a half, so that the conversation that we're having tonight, that you guys can better understand why we are where we are today. It's true we are talking about the report from Byron, but I think even before the report itself, you guys need to know and understand what transpired before so that you could better understand where we are today and why we are where we are today. Alvin and persons on with us, we well remember in 2019, the general election there in December. On the campaign trail of the Dominican Labour Party, Roosevelt Skerrit told the Dominican public that within 100 days of them returning to office, that some movement would be made in terms of the topic that we're discussing tonight. On the eve of that 100-day mark, where he realized that he was falling short in terms of his words to the Dominican public, Roosevelt Skerrit single-handedly appointed this judge, Sir Dennis Byron, to come up with recommendations for the process moving forward. And folks, when a lot of Dominicans heard that news, some were for, some were against. And in the corner of those who were against that appointment was yours truly. And I remember sitting in for Matthias Pelty Jr. on Q95, and I said it openly, that the appointment of Sir Dennis Byron by an active politician in the name of Roosevelt Skerrit, Prime Minister then, was a fundamental error to the process that we're trying to correct. Obviously, I got some flack for that by certain persons, and as well, I got some kudos by others. But that is water under the bridge. My back is very large. I think of what I say before I open my mouth. And so when I open my mouth, I can stand by my words. And I still stand today by those words. Because what we are witnessing today, Alvin, and the persons who are there with us, it is as a result of that fundamental error that the Dominican public allowed, once again, Roosevelt Skerrit to dabble into something that he was not supposed to dabble in. I know some persons pointed me to section 40 of the Constitution. I read it myself, that basically said that the legislator, the government, basically they could do, they have the right to do what Skerrit did. I am not anti our Constitution, but what I have is a brain. And if you can have an active politician dabbling in something that he is part of, then it lets me think or ponder where our heads at in Dominica. Though that situation, Alvin, may not be illegal, but certainly it comes, the ethical nature of it comes into question. And that to me is my issue when Roosevelt Skerrit did that move. And so, Alvin, that report that you read a while ago, parts of it, and the draft legislation that you haven't seen as yet, that some persons have not seen as yet, which must be consulted upon before by the parties in question. And when I say the parties, I include the ordinary Dominican as well, before it goes to Parliament. Dennis Byron, in a letter to these parties concerned, basically said Roosevelt Skerrit / the government appointed him, and so the onus is on Roosevelt Skerrit, the politician, the prime minister, to basically let off or let into the public domain those draft legislations for consultation. And I am saying here, my friend, I am saying here, something is fundamentally wrong about that. Hence, we are where we are today. So Roosevelt Skerrit now / the Dominican Labour Party government, Alvin, They have in their possession a document, the draft of the legislation that's supposed to go before Parliament. And these guys are playing games with that document in terms of releasing it to the public. Because why? Initially, the deal went wrong. Alvin, I know a little thing about construction, very little. But I'm going to say it so that it can apply in that situation. Alvin, if you start a house at the foundation stage, which is a very critical stage for any building, and you get it wrong down there, trust me, Alvin, when you reach to that rooftop, the capping on that galvanized, you're going to see it up there. It's going to be made manifest up there. Because why? Something fundamentally went wrong in the foundation. And so that is why I'm saying the reason why we are there in that back and forth as to that kind of a chicken and egg situation, it was because from day one, Roosevelt's Skerritt basically had to refer that appointment or appointing of Byron to the Electoral Commission. Based on the word that is out there in the public domain, the Electoral Commission basically has already agreed. There was consensus that yes, what we saw, we are good, we are in agreement, and it is good to go before Parliament. Can they release that draft regulation in the public? No. Roosevelt Skerritt have the power again and is holding up the process once more. And so, Alvin, I say all that to say in terms of a chronological order that is, to bring the Dominican public back to memory as to where we started. So the quagmire we are in now, as to we cannot see that draft regulation as yet, what is in there, so that we can have that process moving. It is sort of tied up in some toenail somewhere in Roosevelt Skerritt's coffers. And so it now falls back on the people now, Alvin, to basically take it off from the toenail, force it out from the toenail, and bring it in the public domain, whereby it can be properly ventilated upon and be brought before Parliament. And as you said, the niceties that you said a while ago in terms of bill, law, and whatever it is, so that we now could be much more satisfied as a people when we go to the polls.
Well, let me just respond and say, Lofty, while I understand the concerns that you have expressed, and which is not, it is not far-fetched out there. I understand fully from a historical perspective what transpired then and where we are now. Let me just say, as we speak now, there are supposed to be draft regulations and legislations to be presented before Parliament. As I said, they were intended to have been presented. Okay.
Let me ask you a question, Alvin, before you go further. Where are these draft documents?
I'm coming to that. That's what I'm coming to now. I'm coming to that. So it is for us now, the people, to demand that document. Now, as I said a few minutes ago, it's my understanding that the president of the United Workers' Party, who was then the opposition leader, have copies of those documents, which he admitted to and said he would make those available. I mean, I don't want to come on this program tonight and suggest to folks how they should get a copy, but I recalled in my younger days, when I was part of a struggle and a movement, we would get copies of documents if we want to get copies of documents. I mean, you know, come on. I mean, Dominica is a small community, a small society. There is no way that if a particular document exists, that we should not be able to get a copy. So if we do what is necessary and do it the right way, we can get a copy of the document. And as I said, if the document now contains areas in there that is to our benefit, then we should capitalize on that. We should take advantage of that and force the executive to present those documents to the people. You'll have an opportunity. Like, I mean, if for example, we had the documents today, that is a document we could have speak to more directly in terms of the areas of the document.
Yeah,
and
Alvin,
sure,
not wanting to trip you off, we have now in our company, Dr. Thomson Fontaine is here. He was supposed to be here with us from 7. It's 7:05. So, you know, we can just wrap up on that.
Okay.
We introduce Mr.
Okay,
Thomson.
certainly. But let me just say though, I wanted to make another point. Let me just say, while I understand what you said in terms of how the appointment of Sir Byron went, there was a letter which I'm sure you must have seen, dated December 1st from the Prime Minister to Sir Byron, when he denied receiving a letter from Sir Byron, which Sir Byron had indicated he had sent to him. And among some of the concerns he raised in his letter, that is the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
He raised,
you okay? Cool. Yeah, man. All right, cool. Yeah, man.
Thomson, you're
okay, he muted
yes,
it.
Yes.
He raised 3 areas and took Sir Byron to task. Of those areas had to do, as I said, with the CCJ and some other area. I mean, we don't have time to read.
Yeah, let's just try to just wrap.
But yeah, he took Sir Byron to task, which in itself suggests to me that the whole thing backfired. When he must have thought that Sir Byron would have pleaded in his corner, Sir Byron didn't do that. Sir Byron looked at the matter before him and presented it in a manner, as I said, in keeping with previous recommendations from various reports. Yeah. And when I read the document, as I said, it seems to me that Sir Byron is not far out of what we, the people, want in terms of an electoral reform. So I think what we need to do now, Lofty, is to put the pressure on.
Yeah,
to
I
get
agree.
the information that is required on that particular matter.
I agree.
Move forward with it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And while we don't want to dismiss completely the historical perspective, we got to be more forward-looking.
I understand. I understand that, Alvin.
So that's what I will say for now.
And point taken. Point taken.
Yeah.
All right. Dr. Thomson Fontaine, are you there? Can you hear us?
Hello. Yes. Can you hear me?
I'm hearing you loud and clear. We're just not seeing you as yet.
Well, I'm trying. I am not. I'm not believing in the connection. That's the reason why. So if it's okay, I want to stay on just an audio.
Okay.
I mean, I can try the videos to see if it works, but I'm not sure if it would. And are you any background noises as well?
No, we are good for now. We are good for now.
Good for now. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me try the video to see. Because I'm telling you what, I am still out there in my village, and
okay.
It's yeah. All right, well, so let's see.
Yeah. Okay.
See, I'm not sure if you can see me. It's probably dark.
Yeah, we've seen you. Not the best quality.
Not
but,
the best.
It's always good to see your face, though.
So yes, sure. All right. I'll
so
Doc, get some more light. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, Doc, welcome to the program. I know you're out there in your constituency, but you still made time for us here this evening. So we want to thank you immensely for that.
Yes, certainly. I thought it would be good to join you. Absolutely. I know that the issues being discussed are critically important, and I thought it would be important to weigh in on those. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Alvin Thomas is here with us as well, and many folks are there on the platform as well. So again, on their behalf, I just say welcome again.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's good to be there. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Doc, in the interest of time, we know conversation like this normally, takes some time. So in the interest of that time, that is, we brought you on this evening to basically speak or help us understand in Dominica the situation where the financial sector is concerned. We know that is your strength right there. of late, we have been witnessing a number of banks leaving our shores for whatever reason there is. What is your initial take on that scenario?
Yeah, it's a very worrisome trend. And what that tells me as an economist is that our financial sector is under tremendous stress and strain. And not only that, but the financial sector is really virtually collapsed. Effectively, the banks are not able to make enough. They're not able to make enough money. I mean, for a bank to close up shop in a country, it means that the bank is just simply not making. I mean, banks make the money through the ability to lend. They give loans to consumers to buy cars, to take mortgages, to go on holidays and so on. And it's clear in the current state of the Dominican economy, they're not able to do that. So if they're unable to lend, then the next thing they could probably do is to impose charges on their consumers. But even then, with a very narrow and small consumer base, that is probably not a very good option. And the fact that you have fixed costs, you have rents, you have utilities to pay, wages and salaries of top management, obviously you're not able to survive. And we see that in the closure of those banks. The latest First Caribbean Bank that just closed shop at the end of last month, and before that Scotiabank, and before that actually after Scotiabank was the Royal Bank of Canada. So what the banks are saying effectively is that Dominica is no longer viable for them in terms of being able to make money, in terms of being able to survive. And as such, they feel that they have no choice but to leave the country. So what that means effectively is that the few remaining Dominicans who otherwise would have liked to access banking services, they really don't have much of a choice. It's either you go now to the credit union or to the National Bank of Dominica. The question then becomes, how much more can a national bank really take on? You know, especially considering that you have very high level of non-performing loans. We know that in the banking sector, it's as high as 70%. All right, it means that basically 7 out of 10 people who get loans from those banks, they're either paying very, very late or they're not paying at all. So it is clear that these banks are not able to survive in that kind of environment. And that, to me, is a sad reflection of our economy. It speaks really to where our economy is. And that is a very worrisome trend.
Yes, indeed. Because Mr. Fontaine, it's like we in Dominica now, basically, apart from the credit unions as financial institution we have here, we only have Republic Bank to deal with and the National Bank of Dominica. And as you said a while ago, which I took note of, how much can the National Bank really take on in terms of, consolidating or whatever it is from customers' end, where FCIB or all the other banks that basically fled from Dominica, how much can they undertake in the interest of Dominicans?
Yeah, and not only that, there is a real problem now because it means that you have really one commercial bank.
Yeah,
I mean, this is unheard of. I'm sure, Lofty, when you grew up as a young kid, you always knew 4 or 5 commercial banks in Dominica. Going way back before we were born, in the 60s, in the 50s, you had more than one commercial bank in Dominica. And now, all those years later, there is only one commercial bank. And that, to me, is a very worrisome situation. The question is, how long can this bank even continue? How long can this one commercial bank survive without massive government subventions? And that's probably where we are headed. If this bank is really to survive, it probably will need to be heavily subsidized by the government. And you really cannot run a business that way. Banks literally survive by people's ability to put monies in. Thankfully for us in Dominica, and I think our saving grace in that regard is that we have a very large diaspora population who have been willing to support Dominica. And we have a number of diasporans who have actually put their monies into the banking system in Dominica. They have shown a willingness to bank locally. And I think that is probably the saving grace. But if it was a dependence solely on deposits from local depositors, the bank would have been on a long time. So I would credit the diasporans for really kind of keeping this one bank afloat in some regard, because in order for you to lend, you need this spending. And with that said, I think a number of diasporans have been complaining about their inability to access financing from the banks. And I think now is probably a good time for the banks in the whole strategy of trying to stay afloat, of trying to become more profitable. Probably now is a great time to see how they can probably lend more to diasporans who have invested, who have put their deposits, who have put the savings in the banking system in Dominica.
Yeah, yeah. In addition to that, just before I yield to Brother Thomas so that he could contribute to the conversation we're having, I'm on the ground, Fontaine, and there's a real scare by some persons who, for example, had their monies, their savings, their whatever it is, at, for example, FCIB. Now FCIB is no more, then they basically have to put whatever it is they have now, especially their savings, in the national bank. I'm hearing that talk, and there's that real fear of the perceived situation that government may now, quote unquote, may now know my business and may now be able to target me for whatever reason. What would you tell these people in terms of allaying some of their fears?
Well, it's not an unfounded fear. And I'll tell you it's not, because I had a personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
I had a personal experience where I went to the bank I think it was 2013 or 2014. I went to the bank to inquire about the possibility of a loan, and that information reached the Prime Minister. And not only that, at the time, as a senator in the House of Assembly, the Prime Minister used it. He mentioned it in the House of Assembly publicly.
Wow.
You know, a complete and total, if you like, lack of professionalism, where, you know, persons thought that they would gain points politically by reporting some information about my personal transactions in the bank to the Prime Minister. And it is really, to me, it is nauseating that people can behave so unprofessionally. But that's what you have when politics gets intertwined in financial matters. And really, it should not be. You know, your dealings with your bank should be personal and it should be kept confidential. But we've seen that people, I guess for whatever reasons, whatever their motivations are, that they prefer to do that. So yeah, I'm not surprised that people are having those concerns, because there is a perception that there is too much government control within the National Bank of Dominica, and that may very well be the case.
Yes, indeed. Brother Thomas, any comment from you?
Yes, thank you, Brother Lofty. Hi, Dr. Fontaine. How are you doing, my brother?
I'm doing well, enjoying the beautiful
It's been a while, man. It's
here.
been a while.
You know,
I've been trying desperately to reach out to you.
All right. But it's great. I'm here on a mountaintop, and it's beautiful. You know, it's a beautiful night.
I know. Enjoy it,
and
man.
it's just wonderful.
Don't rub it in too much. But no, I think the banking situation in Dominica is something that must concern all of us. And I see it even in a much broader perspective in terms of the risk factors involved. As you know, Lofty, and I'm sure Dr. Fontaine could speak to that, governments throughout the region have what is called overdraft facilities with banks, where they can go to a bank and borrow by way of overdraft. And I recall in the previous two administrations, that is the Freedom Party and the UWP, you had more than one bank. So the government could have gone to National Bank. Let's say they want to float an overdraft of $100 million. They could go to National Bank, take 30 million, go to Barclays Bank, take 30 there, and go to the other bank and take 30 to give them that, money that they need. In the situation now where we only have one bank, it is troublesome that the government now would try to get that $100 million or $150 million from the National Bank. Now, when the National Bank borrows the government that kind of money by way of overdraft, and the government is not able to service that overdraft, then obviously the deposits that the bank have is from its customers. And that is what they use to service that overdraft. Also, I think as someone who's been involved in the credit union, I think most of the credit unions have their deposits with the National Bank as well. So the credit union themselves, while they could keep a certain amount for liquidity purposes to provide to their members when they come, but the bulk of their monies are with, let's say, the National Bank, or with in some sort of investment of some sort, maybe Social Security or whatever. So my question is a much bigger picture. How do you see that scenario impacting the whole overall economy of the country. And the other question I would want to ask, I myself have not had enough time. How do we compare, let's say, with the other islands in the, let's say, within the OECS, for example? I know at one point Antigua had as many as 6 or 5. Grenada had quite a few. What is it like? I mean, is it a pattern throughout the region, or is it just us? And what do you think might be causing that?
Yeah, quite frankly, I think it is just us. I think the problems they're having now is pushing on the Dominica. Now, I know we keep saying one bank. In reality, we have 2. There is also the Republic Bank that is also in operation. But in terms of the question you raised, a lot of the overdraft facilities are provided by just this National Bank of Dominica. Now, you have 2 problems there. One is, as you rightly pointed out, if the government has one bank where it relies upon for its overdraft facilities, the problem that I see arising is that you're really taking monies away from other sectors of the economy. You see, because the government becomes such a big player. We talk about the issue of what we refer to as crowding out, and that it crowds out the private sector. And that's always a dangerous thing, because you really want a situation where your private sector has access to financing. The private sector has access to, short-term loans, like letters of credits, or they have overdrafts that they too can use to either import products or do whatever they want to. So where you have a government, as we have, that is dominant, as the case is in Dominica, doing business really substantial with one bank, you have those problems. So the net impact on the economy is that your economy becomes stagnated. Because if you have banks, if you have businesses that are unable to borrow, businesses that are unable to secure overdrafts for their own financing, then 1, they cannot expand. 2, they cannot probably they cannot grow their revenues because they probably cannot replenish the stock as quickly as they would like to. And at the end of the day, you have a contracting economy. So that's a very serious problem and a very serious concern. And that's why banks have played a very critical role in the whole question of development and the whole question of economic growth for many, many, many years. There is a role for the banking sector, because what the banks do effectively is that they provide required financing, they provide required capital at a particular point in time. And if that option is no longer there, then you have the consequence of reduced economic growth and stagnating growth, which is what we have in Dominica. And it's a kind of if you like, a circular impact, in the sense that low economic growth leads to the inability for businesses to expand, to hire new workers, to pay higher wages, and persons whose wages are stagnating, their living standards are reduced over time, their real incomes are reduced over time. In turn, they cannot spend as much, and another secondary impact on the businesses. So it's just a cascading impact to the bottom, really. And that is why the role of banks cannot be underestimated, and why I'm so concerned about the fact that banks are leaving economies. We are not seeing the same thing happening. I know some people try to put it off as consolidation, saying, well, the banks are consolidating, but that really is not the case. The banks are leaving because they have effectively failed to really make money in our economy, for all those reasons that we've outlined earlier. And it's a very worrisome trend.
Yeah, indeed. Doc, you are the leader of the United Workers' Party. The question to you now is, I'm not saying if, when your party gets into government, will you or your party sort of hold talks with these banks that, left our shores, or maybe even looking to talk to new banks to sort of come and settle in Dominica and do business to benefit the Dominican people?
The beauty of this whole thing is that if you're able to restore the economy, the banks will come back. Okay. Banks are profit seekers. They're looking to make money. And if the opportunities are there to make money, they will come in without you asking them, without you inviting them, they will come in.
Yeah.
And so as a responsible government, your focus would have to be on regenerating growth. Your focus would have to be on creating employment, creating more opportunities, increasing incomes. And once those conditions are in place, the banks will come back. There's no question about it. They will. So it's more a question of getting the economy to a point that can sustain 4 or 5 commercial banks, because there is so much economic activity. There are so many new businesses being formed, so many new businesses requiring financing. There are so many young persons wanting to get mortgages to build their homes, others looking for mortgage for loans, personal loans to buy vehicles or to buy furniture for their homes. So all of those activities taking place will encourage banks to come back.
Yeah. One person is basically making the point here that small businesses in Dominica are basically going down very, very rapidly. So can you sort of make the correlation between these banks leaving our shores and the struggling small businesses in Dominica?
Oh, absolutely. They have no access. Businesses need financing. Businesses need financing. I tell you, I can give you a number of ways. If you're a retailer, you need to be able to pay for your imported goods that you want to resell. Okay, and if you don't have access, and the way businesses do that normally is to seek overdrafts through the banking system. They don't have the monies right away. They go to the bank gives them the money for 30 days or 60 days. Then they bring the goods in, they pay for it, they sell it, and then they repay the bank. And that process continues month after month. If you have a situation now, as they have in Dominica, where we do not have this availability of credit, then the small businesses are really at their wit's end. So what you find is going to happen? These small business persons are trying to lend now from friends and relatives, but there is a limit. There's a limit to which you can go to your friend and ask for a loan, or to your relative to help you. At the end of the day, you find a business have no choice but to close, and that is a sad reality. So there's a one-on-one, a direct, we call it a linear relationship. It's a direct line between the lack of bank financing and the closure of small businesses, because they're not getting that financing. And as we said, when you don't have this economic activity, this lack of generation of income, persons don't have money. And I tell you, I said it last night on a program, for the Calypso show. I mentioned the fact that the small crowds that we are seeing at the carnival events is as a direct consequence of the lack of money. People simply do not have spending money in Dominica. And you don't have spending money, you can patronize the businesses. All right, so that's another impact there. People don't have real incomes. Our real incomes have been stagnated. When last did public servants receive a raise? And I use public servants for the very simple reason that the single largest block of workers in Dominica, about 4,000 public servants. The single largest block of workers. If you combine all of the private sector workers, they probably do not add up to 4,000. So the largest single block of public servants. And when last did they get a salary increase? All right, so it tells me that with a fixed income, rising prices, your real buying, spending power declines. Whereas before, for example, you may have been paying $250 every month for your Domlec bill. Probably now you're paying $350. But you have not received an extra $100 on your salary, but you have to pay an extra $100 for a fixed utility. Right? So that's the problem that we're having. It's a very serious situation where the people of Dominica do not have spending money. Incomes are stagnating. New jobs are not being created. And that is the legacy of this government, sadly. The inability to create employment, the inability to be able to offer increased salaries to their public servants. And as we said before, the private sector is decimated and they cannot do much better. I think now the average salary in Dominica is about $800 EC. $800 EC would be around what the average person within the private sector is receiving. With $800 a month, you do the math. You tell me how much spending power you have with that kind of money. So we really have to find a way, Lofty and Thomas. We really have to find a way to be able to generate economic growth, to be able to spur the economy, to be able to put more money into the hands of the people, because that's how businesses grow. That is how the economies grow. All right. When people have money to spend, it is through spending. And in spending, you have the multiplier impact. So every dollar spent, for example, multiplies probably 4 or 5 times. And that is how the money goes through the economy, employs more people, creates more wealth, and you go that way. But in Dominica, we have a reversing trend. Wages are stagnant, incomes are stagnant, less spending power, declining levels of income, reduction in employment opportunities, and it does have this downward spiral. This is the reality of today's Dominica.
So let me jump in there, if I may, Lofty.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so based on the analysis you have given, which I personally agree with, how do we change that trajectory of where we are? Because as earlier on, the first hour of the program, we were looking at electoral reform, and I made the point that election has consequences, because the examples that you outline in there, I don't see for the last 10, 15 or more years, we have not implemented any of this. They said, where is no vision, the people perish. So if we elect the wrong people into office, we're going to get the wrong results, or we're not going to get anything done. So the $1 million question is, where do we go from here? And maybe I might ask, in terms of the role of the ECCB, what role would they play in that scenario that we are now? Because one of the things that you might see, and you reference people in the diaspora and the fact that they save back home, if the banks are viewed as suspects, meaning that, boy, my money not sure there, they're going to draw down, they're going to take out their money. And think of people in the diaspora. I think it was, I said on the show, I think it was 2020, if my memory serves me correct. The diasporans in Dominica diasporans, in the diaspora, sent home somewhere close to $40 million US. So if the diasporan people say, you know what, I'm going to take my damn money out of that bank and draws out, again, we're going to have even a much bigger problem. The deposits are depleted now. So my question is, where do we go from here in terms of action? Because quite honestly, Dr. Fontaine, I mean, the ideas you presented there, I maybe it's esprimal papa, as they say. I don't see it happening. So I'm kind of throwing that out and see if we can figure out a way forward then.
Yeah, no, it's a great direction in which to lead, because, you know, you really have to think of how to get out of this. One thing is very clear. This government of Dominica, the current government, is not going to do it for you. Okay, they're not going to do it. They don't know how. They've been there for 20 years. And if after 20 years, you've been unable to generate any type of growth. I mean, we've had the lowest growth within the past 20 years of any government in any time in our history. So the inability of this government to generate any kind of growth is the problems that we're having, right? So that is one. It's not going to come from this government. The second, the other question is, then what are the people going to do about it? And are the people even aware or conscious of the fact that their fortunes, their livelihoods, their futures are tied in with the decisions that they make at the polls? And you get the sense sometimes in talking to some people that there is that disconnect, that they don't understand that when I go to the polls and I elect a government, that this government is going to have a serious impact on my life in the next years, going forward. I somehow that disconnect is there, and it's very worrisome. Because I'm talking to people one-on-one and trying to get them to understand that, hey, your decision has consequences, right? So I was going to make an example, but I will not talk about it because it's kind of personal in terms of reacting to some people, right? But I will tell you this: try to get people to understand that, hey, you are responsible in a way for what is happening to you. All right, because you've done it over and over again. You've gone to the polls, you've voted for this government. And so how do you reverse it? And that is where I think the conversation has to be, okay? I keep saying that Dominica is not a difficult country to put on its feet. You have a very small country. What you need in Dominica is 15,000 good paying jobs and you're good, you know? But this government is not going to do it. They've shown a complete lack of interest in the agriculture sector, in manufacturing, in the services sector, in the knowledge industry. The best this government has done, I'll give them credit for that, is that they've given us a call center. But that's it. The extent of success of this government is with a call center, one call center in Dominica. That's the extent of their going into the knowledge industry. So, we have a serious problem. And I think until and unless we have a change of government, we are going to continue in that downward slow slide. I call it a slow slide to nowhere. And that's exactly what we are witnessing in Dominica, sadly.
Yes, indeed. Carol, let me take a question from the live feed now. Thanks, Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Carol Bruni is writing here. He's asking the question here. Are the people's money in depository accounts have any form of insurance, as in the US having the FDIC insurances?
The answer is no. The answer is no. You're like in the US, for example, when you save in the banking system up to $250,000, your money is insured. So that if the bank suddenly goes bankrupt or it goes belly up, the federal government steps in and they will reimburse you for up to $250,000, up to $250,000. Not the case in Dominica. So if a bank goes belly up, then you're on your own. The good thing is that the banks that we've seen, what we've had is what we call an orderly exit. It has not been a suddenly where the banks have just gone belly up.
Yes,
these are profitable banks that have decided to close shop. All right. So in that case, they've made arrangements to get people's monies back to them. Okay. But if you have a situation, for example, if God forbid, like National Bank were to go belly up, without the backup of a headquartered bank, like we have Scotiabank was headquartered in Canada, they could draw on those resources. In the case of National Bank, that is it. This bank goes under. Whatever you have in this bank is lost. It's gone.
So, Dr. Fontaine, are you telling me I should go back to the days of my grandfather and put some of what I have?
No. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that at all.
I'm just saying. Should I put some of my own in a tin somewhere?
No, I still feel the banks are the best bet, but there's an inherent risk.
Yeah,
I'm saying that we do not have an insurance system for deposits, and that's an inherent risk that you take. So, a lot of it is just having confidence in the bank. Having confidence, and you can even really diversify per se. You can say, okay, there are two banks now, so in a ways you could probably diversify that risk. So you don't put all of your savings into one bank. Okay. I can suggest the credit unions, because credit unions themselves, they use the bank at the national bank. Yes. All right. So they're linked. Yes. So you can diversify through other credit unions. The only diversification you have right now in Dominica, if you don't have access to foreign banks. Like in my case, having lived abroad, I have access to foreign banks. I can bank overseas.
Right.
Someone brought
that question up earlier, Doc. They're asking you whether persons in Dominica, seeing that present situation, can opt for banking outside of Dominica.
They don't really have much options. There was some attempt within the OECS to make it easy. So that, for example, I could open a bank account in St. Lucia, but it is there in theory, but it has not really happened in practice. You don't really have a lot of that happening.
Okay.
And so in a way, you are condemned or confined to what you do in Dominica, and that is a concern. Yeah.
Talking about two banks as well, there's a healthy thing about more than one, more than two, more than three in terms of the competition. Persons are now tied to Republic Bank and National Bank. What did you say to that situation where the competition in the market is concerned?
When you talk about taking action against risks that could ascribe to you, or risks that you could take on, and you're talking about how do I diversify the risk in terms of safeguarding my hard-earned savings? How do I ensure that I have savings for my old age or for my family and to do other things? You think of diversification, right? And one way where you don't have an insurance scheme, you put in different banks, you spread it around, you have 4 or 5 bank accounts in different banks, so that if one bank goes under, at least you have a fallback on the other banks. Without that option in Dominica, you also don't have the option of diversifying into other assets. So, for example, if in the United States, You can actually put your assets into the stock market, into the bond market. You can buy into government issued T-bills. You don't have those options in Dominica. I mean, some people can go into the U.S. markets if they want to. You can actually do that in Dominica, but that's not an option that many Dominicans use. So you really don't have a lot of choice. You know, you just have to really hope that your government is looking out, that the ECCB is doing its work in terms of being able to police and to supervise in a way that if there's going to be any kind of break in the bank, that this is known and it can be signaled to the bank to take action to fix it. But other than that, you're really at the mercy of whatever happens in the banking system. And I think the only way you cure that, we never talked about banks when the economy is doing good.
True.
When the economy is doing well, you don't worry about the banks. You know that you can put you can go to the bank with confidence that your money is there because the banks are making money. Everybody's happy. That's not the case in Dominica. We really need to turn this metric around. We need to turn that situation around.
Let me ask Dr. Fontaine, though, your comments. In terms of that scenario of the banks and the way some of the economies like ours, Dominica, is going, do you foresee a possibility of that EC dollar being now touched? Because, you know, right now we have that one EC dollar and you have to have unanimity, or they say all member states supposed to agree to change it or devalue it, as the case might be. Do you see what implications do you see for our EC dollars going down the road?
You know, the beauty of a currency, what we call a currency arrangement, a common currency arrangement, as we have in the OECS or within the East Caribbean Currency Union, is that you have the idea of a shared reserve. Okay, and what this effectively means is that the strength of the dollar does not rely solely on your performance, on your economic performance, on one country's economic performance. It relies upon the pooled performance. So if you have a really strong economy, like if Antigua is very strong, for example, Grenada is very strong, it will pull Dominica up because they'll have enough reserves within those countries that when it is redistributed to Dominica, it covers it. So the EC dollar is not on the threat now for the very simple reason the other countries like Antigua, St. Kitts and Nevis are doing really, really well economically. So they're able to sustain it. They're able to draw sufficient reserves to cover the currency because your currency comes under pressure if you have a significant loss of reserves. Okay, years ago in the 70s, we saw what we call the gold standard, where every dollar you print had to be backed up by gold. That's what the gold standard was. Now it is different. Most currencies are backed up by the US dollar, or in some countries, they now use a basket of currencies like the euro or the US dollar that backs up this currency. But it means that these monies have to be available within the country in the form of reserves. So for the East Caribbean Currency Union, there are sufficient reserves so that the question of a devaluation of the EC dollar doesn't really come into play right now. I know that there has been some talk about it loosely. People feel that it would benefit the countries, for example, especially if you're doing tourism, it would benefit the countries by making your product more attractive. But I heard Antigua boasting that they had 100% occupancy this winter. So it tells me that they don't really need this extra traffic, right? Because they're doing really, really well. The problem really, Alvin, is that Dominica, we've not gotten our act together. We have not been able to do
and then
the
that
necessary.
Is the point. Because if Antigua, St. Kitts, all of them are pulling their weight and doing what they're supposed to do, and you are part of the team and you're not pulling your weight,
they're supporting us.
You're actually a liability to the rest.
You're a liability, but thankfully they have enough, they're generating enough reserves to cover us. And so we are literally taking shelter under their arms. And when we should be leading the way, we are the ones taking shelter. Yeah.
Yes, Thomson. Jean Francis is writing here. Dominica's problem, basically just agreeing with some of the sentiments you said earlier. Dominica's problem is that the government is because they're not creating the enabling environment. So that does matter. It does not matter, sorry, how much businesses one comes up with. Confidence in the economy is what that is just not there. That is what that person is saying. Like, confidence is not there.
The confidence is not there. And you know, someone told me, right, that it is a deliberate you know, I may be a bit simplistic in that sense, but I would hate to think that the government would deliberately impoverish its people for political gain. But that appears to be what is going on in Dominica. Because I can't imagine for the life of me why this government has not invested in the agriculture sector, why it has not invested in the development of people. It appears to me that a deliberate political ploy is to keep people at a point where they need to keep coming to the government for handouts. And they feel beholden to this government. As sinister as it sounds, as diabolical as it sounds, that appears to be what obtains in Dominica.
Wow. Very, very sad situation indeed, eh? Thomas?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
It is.
Yes. Well, I think the bottom line, and like I say, I know some of the folks even on the chat, and I'm sure Thomson have heard it over and over, is that, and that's why I asked the question earlier, what do we do? Where do we go? Because we all this beautiful conversation of what the situation is. And the next question is, how do we get out of that? And like you say, we have to undertake and get into that mode of letting the people see the consequences to what you do. Going in that polling booth, election has consequences. It is much more than just putting an X. And I think we have to get to the point where we have to begin to educate the people. I'm not sure what strategy or method, but the people have to have a say. And that is why this electoral reform is so important. Because if we can get this electoral reform, hold the government to their feet, get the legislation that we need, clean up our voters list, go back to the polls and elect people that truly represents the people of Dominica, then maybe we can have we can see some light within the tunnel. But until such time we continue as is, with the status quo as it is, we're just going to be constantly spinning top in mode, because all of those things will constantly be looking at us in our face. And I'm not sure, maybe at some point we'll get frustrated enough to say, well, our back's against the wall, then we're going to do something about it.
You're absolutely correct, Alvin. I mean, that's it. To me, the only lifeline for Dominicans right now is to pursue the electoral reforms. Having pursued those reforms, as you said, get new elections and get in a new team that can do and understands how this economic thing works and can really work in the best interest of the Dominican public. I hate to remind our Labour Party supporters that we do not have a government that's working in the best interest. The evidence is clear, at least to me, and I hope they're saying it, that we do not have a government working in the best interest, and we really need to get to that position. We have a government that is concerned about, a government that is working in the best interest, and that is why, as a leader of the United Workers' Party, we are determined to really push that message. In the next few weeks, we'll be meeting with the different constituencies across Dominica, and with that very simple message that we understand you, we understand what needs to be done. What we now need is your support, all right? As much and as clear as our vision is, as clear as all of that is, until we get a situation where the people of Dominica buys into it, we'll just be at that, as we say, proverbial spinning top in mud. But if the Dominican public buys into that vision, if they understand where we are trying to go, I believe that we'll be able to make some inroads.
Yeah. Dr. Thomson Fontaine, I want to thank you very much. But just before, we will let you off the hook, as it were. We know you're still in your community out there. I've heard you on a number of occasions speak to your situation, speak to your expertise. Every time I hear you say that, Doc, I love what I'm hearing coming from you. It's not a matter of you blowing your own trumpet, as it were, but you have a doctorate in financial matters. you're a financial guru, as it were. Dominica now is in that predicament, Dr. Thomson Fontaine. You being the leader of United Workers Party, obviously you work with a team. What can you tell the Dominican people as to what you and your team will bring to the table as it pertains to helping fix Dominica financial woes once elected?
You know, I think all my years of training, all my years of experience has kind of brought me to that central place and in time and now. I mean, I've been a PhD economist now for 23 years. I have worked in an environment where I think I have a very good understanding of how economists work. I've been able to put that in practice, not only in the theory, but the practice of it. I've written about it in academic papers, and I think I have a good appreciation for what needs to be done in Dominica. And I believe that with me is a party that has the experience. We have a party that has the experience of governance. Our party was in government in 1995 and between 1995 and 2000, and they were able to in a very practical ways, we're able to grow the economy. We're able to create jobs. We're able to build up the agriculture sector. They're able to build roads all over the country, build new schools, get more children into secondary education. A lot of good things was done by this party. So you have the very practical aspect of the party, and these people that did those work are still there. Honorable Ellison James is still there to give his expertise. Honorable Ron Green. The persons who were there are still available to us. Peter Carbon in agriculture, for example, is still there. You know, there are persons who are still able to lend their expertise in that area. And for me as a leader, coming from that side of it, in terms of even a practical application of those things and the understanding, we'll be able to guide this effort. What we now need is the Dominican public to have faith in us that we can do as we say, you know, and our task is to explain that to them. And that's why I think the idea of going out to the public, talking to them, explaining to them, of being patient in understanding where they're coming from, in understanding why they've had to do what they've had to do in the past to sustain themselves, to just get by. But getting that buy-in from them, I think, is critical. And so for me as a leader of the party is to guide the team in that regard, to go out to the various communities and bring this message that we are able to take Dominica to that place where we can see a reversal. Instead of this out-migration, people will be rushing, flocking into Dominica because they will hear that there are jobs being created in Dominica. And that is what we want to see. We want to see good paying jobs in Dominica. We want to see a creation of income. We want to see a creation of wealth. We want to see people growing rich and making money and passing on to the children. I make no apologies about that. I don't apologize for wanting that for the people of Dominica, to have a very strong middle class. There was a time, believe it or not, Lofty, when Dominicans used to take vacations. Dominicans used to charter jets, you know, to travel to London and to Paris. Alvin, remember that? He was one
Oh yeah. I was General Secretary of the CSC. And I tell you, we had excursions going to Canada, England,
absolutely,
America,
absolutely,
every year.
Every year.
Many years.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about 20 people, you know.
Yes.
100 plus was going to
all
the United States, going to London, going to Canada.
Absolutely. So we've been there. We know it is possible. It is doable. What we need is a government that can actually follow through and do it. And this government is not the one for it. It's not. I'm sorry. This Labour Party government is failed. It is failed. It is worn out. It is washed up. It is time for it to go.
Yes. Doc, again, we want to thank you immensely for taking time off your busy schedule this Sunday. I know you are out there doing work, but you still made time for us, made time for the Dominican public, both here and abroad, and coming to speak. Your final comments, sir?
Well, I really want to thank you for the opportunity. Thanks to all those who were tuned in. Before I tuned in very quickly on Facebook, I realized there were countless listeners to Civic Vibe tonight. It is great. I'm just going to go back and step back right there again, back to talking to some people. I don't know if you're hearing the music in the background.
Yes.
But it's one of those things. It's an opportunity to also talk to people and really just get a sense as to where they are and you know, try to explain all of what we are talking about. So between the music and the drinks, you try to talk, you try to impress them, as to what is possible. And so I thank you for the opportunity, and I thank you for the support of the diaspora. I believe that as we move forward, that the diaspora support becomes all the more important, because there are people, I tell you, up to yesterday, somebody reached out to me and says, listen, what are you guys doing? If you're having these types of events, I can provide this for you. I can support you. People are coming, stepping forward, offering the support, offering the help. And I know that the diaspora have our back in that regard. I want to thank the people in the diaspora who are supporting us and who are looking forward to great things together. And I believe that together we can do this. Together we can transform Dominica. Together we can make Dominica one of the best countries in the world. I believe that, period.
Doc, thank you very, very much indeed.
It's my pleasure. Thanks to you and to Alvin. Alvin, always great seeing you. Thanks.
Yeah, man, a pleasure,
it.
man. And let me thank you as well. Yeah, we got a lot of work to be done. Those of us in the diaspora are very, we're waiting with bated breath to do what is needed to assist in the development back home.
Absolutely.
So look forward to collaborating on a number of areas.
All right. Thanks. From Grand Form with love. Take care, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Yes, folks, we have been speaking to the leader of the United Workers' Party in Dominica. They call themselves Team Dominica. That is Dr. Thomson Fontaine. Out there somewhere in his constituency doing some work with his people. That is what matters most at this time. We want to apologize for the poor quality of his video. You can well imagine he's out there, not in the comfort of his office or his home. And so again, on behalf of the Civic Vibes team, we want to apologize to you guys for the poor quality in his video output here. Alvin, we have 5 minutes to sort of, bring the curtains down on things, as it were.
Yeah, well, again, I think the conversation was a very engaging one. And it is my hope that the message doesn't just resonate among those of us who are logged in here, tuned in there, but that message is brought across to the wider Dominican populace and also Dominicans in the diaspora. There's a lot of work to be done, but like Dr. Thomson Fontaine, I think if we approach it all together with a common objective, I think we'll achieve. I always believe that notwithstanding where we are, and given the trend in the region, and you may have heard that from me before, and I will continue to mention it. We saw some wind of change in Grenada, and we saw it recently in Antigua, to a certain extent. I believe the same is going to happen in Dominica. I think we need to apply pressure now as it is on the question of electoral reform, not just to talk about it, but to demand it this time around, to insist that we get legislated the appropriate reform that we need for our electoral process in Dominica. And as I've said already, election has consequences. And once we can get the right people on the bus and the right seat on the bus, I think we can take Dominica to higher heights. I mean, Dr. Fontaine is so right. I mean, I recall my years in the CSA. I mean, Lofty, every year, for many years, we had discussions, I'm not talking about 15, 20 people, To the United States alone, we had sometimes 100 plus. Then we had almost another 100 to England. Then we had another almost 100 or thereabout again to Canada. And these folks who travel every year, go on vacation. You talk about civil servants and even some persons in the private sector building their homes. I mean, when you think of all those homes that were built in Canefield area by civil servants, police officers, nurses, doctors, you name it. Think of all those homes that were built at Emsall. Think of all those homes that were built Goodwill. I mean, just go in any other communities. Construction, people building their homes, left, right, and center. I mean, are you seeing that now in Dominica? How many homes are being built? How many people? I mean, you had government had what you call a government housing loan board scheme. People are building. You had Simon Bolivar, the unions, who negotiated with an agency and provided so many homes up in that area. So I think that shows itself that an economy is working, and it's not. So I think we need to get the right leaders, the right persons in place, And I'm confident that we can do that. I think the question remains is to constantly dialogue with the people. I think we have to do a lot more listening to them than even talking to them. Listen to them, get their story, let them tell you their story. And based on their story, I'm sure we'll be able to take Dominica to a next level. So always a pleasure. And I enjoy having that conversation today. Look forward to another program sometime in the future.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Alvin, for always willing to avail yourself, take some time of your Sunday to be part and parcel of the conversation to educate or re-educate Dominicans, as it were, by and large. Dominicans, final thing on the agenda for tonight, Tuesday, next week, Tuesday, that is the 7th of February, there is a protest action outside our parliament in Dominica. I'm asking you, those of you on the live now, those of you who are in Dominica, those of you who have friends in Dominica, families in Dominica, outside parliament is our place to be from 9 o'clock, where we'll be attending to electoral reform matters and other matters of national importance. All right, so you heard it. We have been talking. Now it's time to turn that talk, as it were, into action. So let me see your face in the place. 9 o'clock, thereabout, outside our parliamentary building, where we will be speaking there in very unambiguous terms and tones to our leaders in Dominica. Dominicans, that is it for us here for the Civic Vibes program. It's 1 minute past 8 o'clock, so we realize we took a minute of your time, but by 5 minutes thereafter, we will be out from your speech.
Lofty, I'm not sure if I heard, is this Tuesday? This week, Tuesday coming
yes,
tomorrow,
this Tuesday.
not next week, this Tuesday.
Well, when I say, well, sorry, my apologies. It's this Tuesday, yes, the 7th. I said the 7th.
This Tuesday.
This Tuesday. All right, yes. So yes, it's this Tuesday. Correction taken, correction noted, Alvin. This Tuesday. All right, folks. So that is it. We will be having a jolly good time outside our parliament. So please make some time. We know you guys can always make an excuse. You're busy in this, you're busy in that. We give you ample time, ample notice. Wherever you need to put your children on that day, whatever you need to set aside, cook your food the night before, whatever you need to do. Tuesday the 7th, sacrifice that time for your country, Dominica. And on that note, Brother Dice said it some time back in song. We are going back to our country. So on that note, we'll be leaving you in just a bit. Let's take a little from King Dice when I'll come back.
All right, Lofty. Take care, man. All the best.
All right, Brother Alvin. Take care.
My heart is heavy, my soul not free. I feel this every day. Maybe I'm just guilty. Dominica has become this way, where our people are standing on political mischief and division. And politicians control citizens' hearts and soul before God, before land, before church, before family and country. Here, Dominica, my true confession is what I didn't do. I watched you suffer, for my allegiance was to someone else, not you. No advantages, many in numbers, the patriots are few. So it's no wonder we are where we are. We did not stand with you. Now we are best in poverty.
All right, Dominicans. So yes, outside our parliament, this Tuesday the 7th, that is the time we make for country, as King Dice says in song.
Beginning with me.
So Dominicans, that is it for yet another Civic Vibes program right here, the 5th day of February 2023. See you next week, same time, same place from the 6 o'clock hour, live on Facebook and now, these days, on YouTube.
Lots of signs, but none so blind as he who will not see. Loyalty to party is the road to poverty. Has division brought us progress? Are our people enjoying success? It is already late. Come, let's grab our faith and repatriate our hearts, our minds to our country. Urgently, dear Dominica, my true confession is what I didn't do. I got to suffer, for my allegiance was to someone else, not you. All your exploiters, many are strangers, the patriots of you. So it's no wonder we are where we are. We did not stand with you. Now we live with hostility, fruits of a misplaced loyalty. Now we must turn back to country first, immediately, beginning with me. It won't be easy, change is hard, everything has its price. But for children and country, it is worth the sacrifice. The past is past that we cannot change, but our present and future remains. Take a good look around, we have lost so much ground. Turn around, come around, your loyalty belongs to this country, not that party. Here Dominica, my true confession is what I didn't do. I got you suffer, for my allegiance was to someone else, not you. All your exploiters, many in numbers, the patriots of you. So it's no wonder we are where we are. We did not stand with you. Now if we are in dishonesty, fruits of a misplaced loyalty. Now we must turn back to country, each and everybody, beginning with me.